Lori Navarro's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel in the hospital parking garage, counting backward from 10 as the counselor had taught her. 8 weeks since the shooting. 8 weeks since her nervous system had rewritten itself into a permanent state of emergency. Through the windshield, she watched other nurses heading home, their shoulders relaxed, their steps unhurried, and felt the familiar ache of isolation. Inside her apartment, 8-year-old Lydia waited, probably drawing alone in her room again, learning fear by osmosis from a mother who jumped at the sound of closing doors. The neurobiologist's word from that morning session still echoed. Your amygdala has been hijacked. Every sound registers as mortal danger. But here's what you need to understand. Human connection is the only thing that can rewire it back. Lori pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. Connection required vulnerability. Vulnerability required trust. And trust felt like standing blindfolded in traffic. She didn't know that the answer to her impossible question, could she ever feel safe again, was waiting behind her apartment building, kneeling in expensive slacks beside her daughter, his tattooed fingers carefully wrapping a stray cat's injured leg with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime mastering control over violence. Before we dive into this shocking story, if you're watching from Australia, anywhere in the USA, the UK, or anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this voice is reaching. While you're there, hit the subscribe button. Our stories aren't just entertainment. They're real experiences that teach us about love, trust, human behavior, and the uncomfortable truths people face. By subscribing, you're joining a community that values honest storytelling and meaningful conversations. Your likes and comments help this message reach someone who might need it. Now, let's get into how everything all began. 3 years earlier, Lori had made a promise to herself. Never again. Never again would she let a man into Lydia's life who could disappear without warning, leaving behind only the wreckage of broken promises and unpaid bills. Lydia's father had taught her that lesson with brutal efficiency. Here 1 month, ghost the next, resurfacing only when he needed something. When he'd finally stopped calling altogether, Lori had felt something close to relief. Single motherhood was hard, but predictable and hard. Manageable hard. She'd built their life like a fortress. Her nursing shifts at Phoenix Memorial, Lydia's routine at Roosevelt Elementary, their small apartment in South Phoenix, where rent was affordable and neighbors minded their business. No variables. No surprises. No one close enough to hurt them. Then came the shooting. It happened on a Tuesday night during the late shift. Gang violence. The police said later, spillover from a territorial dispute that had nothing to do with the hospital. But the 19-year-old bleeding out on her trauma bay table hadn't cared about territorial disputes. His mother's screams hadn't cared about gang politics. And when the boy's heart had stopped despite everything Lori did, despite the chest compressions that left her arms aching, despite the medication she'd pushed, despite the prayers she'd whispered, something inside Lori had stopped too. Not her heart, her sense of safety. The first panic attack came a week later during a routine shift. A trauma patient arrived. Car accident. Not violence, but when the gurney crashed through the doors, Lori's vision tunneled. Her heart rate spiked to 140. Her hands went numb. She'd locked herself in the supply closet for 20 minutes, counting her breaths, while her colleagues handled the patient without her. The hospital mandated counseling after the 3rd episode. Standard protocol for trauma exposure, they said. Nothing to be ashamed of. But Lori felt ashamed anyway. She was a nurse. She was supposed to handle the crisis. Instead, she was falling apart in supply closets while her daughter learned to tiptoe around her mother's invisible wounds. The counselor, Dr. Patricia Chun, a woman with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd heard every variation of human suffering, explained it during their first session. Your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. When we experience trauma, our amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive. It starts interpreting neutral stimuli as threats. The slam of a door becomes a gunshot. A raised voice becomes an attack. You're not broken, Lori. You're stuck in survival mode. So how do I get unstuck? Lori had asked. Dr. Morgan's answer was the thing Lori least wanted to hear. Connection. Your nervous system needs to experience safety in the presence of another person. We call it co-regulation. When you're near someone whose nervous system is calm, it teaches your system that the danger has passed. Lori had nodded politely, but inside, she was already rejecting the premise. Connection meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant risk. And risk was exactly what her traumatized brain couldn't tolerate. So she'd chosen isolation instead. It was safer that way. Lonelier, but safer. What she hadn't noticed was how Lydia's drawings had changed. The bright colors are fading to grays and browns. The smiling stick figures were replaced by houses with locked doors and windows covered in bars. 8 years old, and already learning that the world was something to hide from. Lori first saw Yoshii Sho on a Saturday morning in late September, when the Phoenix heat had finally broken into something bearable. Lydia had found the injured cat behind their apartment complex, a scraggly orange tabby with a badly twisted front leg, mewing pitifully near the dumpsters. Lori's first instinct was to call animal control and pull Lydia away. But before she could, a man appeared from the warehouse loading dock across the alley. Everything about him screamed control. His pressed charcoal slacks despite the weekend. His white dress shirt with sleeves rolled precisely to mid-forearm. His movements, economical, deliberate, nothing wasted. He knelt beside the cat without hesitation, and Lori noticed his hands first. They should have terrified her. The tattoos crawling across his knuckles and fingers. Intricate patterns that she recognized from a documentary she'd seen about Japanese organized crime. Irizumi. The kind of ink that marked you for life, that announced allegiance to a world most people only saw in movies. But his hands moved with such careful gentleness as he examined the cat's injury that Lori's threat response system, usually screaming at this point, remained eerily quiet. The leg is broken, but it can heal, he said in accented English, not looking up. If you have a box and some cloth, I can splint it. Lydia was already running to their apartment before Lori could protest. I'm Yoshii Sho, the man said, standing but maintaining a respectful distance. I rent the warehouse behind your building. Import business. Lori's nursing instincts kicked in before her trauma response. You know how to set a cat's leg? I know how to set many things. Something flickered in his expression, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. In my former work, we were expected to be resourceful. It was the careful phrasing that told Lori everything she needed to know. Former work, not past job, not a previous career, the kind of euphemism that carried weight. She should have grabbed Lydia and left. Instead, she watched him splint the cat's leg with materials from their kitchen, his tattooed fingers working with the precision of a surgeon. His movements were never hurried, never aggressive. Each action telegraphed seconds before he made it, giving the injured animal time to understand what was coming. Like someone who'd spent years learning to make himself predictable in an unpredictable world. Thank you, Lori said when he finished, hating how her voice sounded, stiff, formal, armored. Yoshii handed the cat to Lydia with instructions for care, then nodded once to Lori. Your daughter has a kind heart. That is valuable. He walked back to his warehouse, and Lori realized her heart rate hadn't spiked once. No tunnel vision, no numbness in her hands, no overwhelming urge to flee. Her traumatized nervous system had somehow categorized this tattooed stranger, this man who radiated controlled danger, as safe. The contradiction kept her awake that night. Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Yoshii arrived at his warehouse each morning at 7 and left each evening at 6. Lydia, desperate for any adult attention that didn't come wrapped in her mother's anxiety, would wave from their third-floor window. He would nod back, always the same measured gesture, always from the same respectful distance. Lori researched him obsessively. Another trauma response, Dr. Morgan had explained, was this compulsive need for information as a substitute for actual control. She found Yoshii Import Services listed with the city, legitimate business license, trade registration with customs. No criminal record in the United States, though that didn't mean much for someone who'd been careful. What she couldn't find were answers about the tattoos. The Irizumi that marked him as someone from a world where violence wasn't chaos. It was architecture. Why doesn't Mr. Yoshii scare you? Lydia asked one evening while Lori helped with homework. The question landed like a punch. What makes you think he should scare me? Lydia shrugged, not looking up from her math worksheet. Because everything else does. 8 years old and already cataloging her mother's fears like inventory. Lori didn't have an answer, but the question haunted her through another sleepless night until she finally brought it to Dr. Morgan. Tell me about this man, Dr. Morgan said, settling in her chair with that particular quality of attention that made Lori feel simultaneously seen and exposed. Lori described Yoshii carefully, his routine, his controlled movements, the tattoos, the way Lydia had adopted him as a kind of distant uncle figure who required nothing but accepted everything. And your nervous system's response? Dr. Morgan asked. That's the problem. There isn't one. No panic. No hypervigilance. You should trigger every alarm I have, but instead, Lori trailed off, frustrated by her inability to articulate the paradox. Instead, you feel calm around him, Dr. Morgan finished. Which makes no sense. He's dangerous. I know he's dangerous. Those tattoos aren't decorative. They're institutional. Yakuza, most likely, though he's never confirmed it. But somehow my body doesn't react to him the way it reacts to everything else. Dr. Morgan leaned forward. Lori, what I'm about to explain might challenge what you think you know about trauma and safety. Are you ready? Lori nodded, though she wasn't sure she was. Your conscious mind, your thinking brain, assesses danger rationally. It looks at evidence and makes logical conclusions. That's why you can intellectually understand that this man with Yakuza tattoos represents potential danger. But there's another system operating below consciousness called neuroception. It's your nervous system's subconscious assessment of safety, and it responds to different cues than your thinking brain. What kind of cues? Predictability, controlled movement, respectful distance, calm vocal tone, facial expressions that match words. These signals are safe to your autonomic nervous system even when your conscious brain is saying danger. And here's what's fascinating. People who've mastered violence often develop the most regulated nervous systems of anyone. Lori felt something shift in her understanding. Because controlling violence requires controlling yourself first. Exactly. Someone who can harm but chooses restraint, who can be dangerous but remains predictable. That person's nervous system is sending constant signals of self-regulation. And your traumatized system, which has been flooded with dysregulation since the shooting, is responding to that. It's like finding shade in the desert. But that doesn't make him safe, Lori protested. Safe and feeling safe are different things, Dr. Morgan said gently. Your nervous system isn't telling you this man won't ever be dangerous. It's telling you that right now, in this moment, his regulation is helping to regulate you. That's co-regulation at work. Lori sat with that for a long moment. So what do I do with this information? That depends. What do you want? The answer came before Lori could filter it. I want to stop being so afraid all the time. I want Lydia to have a mother who doesn't jump at shadows. She swallowed hard. I want to feel safe again. Then you have a choice to make, Dr. Morgan said. You can continue isolating, which feels controllable but keeps you stuck in dysregulation. Or you can practice being around someone whose nervous system signals safety to yours, even if your thinking brain has objections. Neither choice is wrong, but only one has the potential to rewire your trauma response. Lori left the session with more questions than answers. But that night, when Lydia asked if Mr. Yoshii could show her how to make origami cranes like the one she'd seen on his desk, Lori heard herself say yes instead of finding an excuse to refuse. It was a small yes, a cautious yes, but it was a yes nonetheless. The revelation came on a Thursday evening in late October, when the temperature had dropped enough that Phoenix almost felt like autumn. Lori was washing dishes at the kitchen window when she saw them arrive. 3 men in dark suits, expensive cars, and the kind of visit that announced itself as business rather than social. They entered Yoshii's warehouse without knocking, and even from 3 floors up, Lori could read the body language. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a reminder. She should have turned away, should have closed the blinds and pretended she hadn't seen. But trauma had made her hypervigilant, and hypervigilance meant she couldn't watch. The confrontation lasted 20 minutes. No violence, at least none visible from her window. But when the men left, Yoshii stood alone in the empty parking lot, and Lori watched him flex his hands repeatedly, those tattooed fingers catching the streetlight like evidence. She didn't sleep that night. By morning, she'd made a decision that Dr. Morgan would probably call reckless, but that felt like the only honest thing to do. She found Yoshii at his usual time, just before 7 a.m., unlocking the warehouse. "You're Yakuza," she said without preamble. Not a question. He paused, key in the lock, and something flickered across his carefully controlled expression. No surprise, more like resignation. "Former," he said quietly. "The tattoos are permanent. The obligations are more complicated. Those men last night. Reminders that former is a relative term in some circles." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something unguarded in his expression. "I left Japan to be less than I was, to build something that didn't require violence. But some debts follow you regardless of geography." Lori's nurse brain, her mother brain, her trauma brain, all of them screamed that this was the moment to walk away, to protect Lydia, to choose safety over whatever this was becoming. But her nervous system, that subconscious assessment system Dr. Morgan had explained, remained stubbornly calm, because Yoshii wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't performing control. He was just tired, human, someone carrying his own impossible weight. "You should be terrified of me," Yoshii said, reading her expression. "Everything logical says you should take your daughter and never speak to me again." "I know," Lori admitted, "but that's not what my body tells me." "What does it tell you?" She thought about Dr. Morgan's explanation of neuroception, about regulated nervous systems and co-regulation, about the paradox of finding calm in the presence of controlled danger. "That you've spent your whole life mastering violence," she said slowly, "which means you've also mastered restraint. That you move the way you do because unpredictability is dangerous. That you maintain distance because you understand boundaries better than most people ever will. That you're not trying to be safe, you're trying to be less dangerous." And my traumatized brain, which can't tell the difference between a slam door and a gunshot, somehow recognizes the difference between someone who's chaotic and someone who's controlled. Yoshii was very still. "Your daughter," he said finally. "She asks many questions. About Japan, about business, about why I work alone. I have been careful not to answer in ways that would concern you." I know. I've been listening. Lori took a breath. I'm going to ask you something that might sound insane. I have experience with insane requests. My therapist says I need to practice co-regulation, being around people whose nervous systems are calm enough to teach mine how to be calm again. But everyone I know is either too anxious themselves or too eager to fix me, and both of those things make my hypervigilance worse. You're the only person who doesn't trigger my trauma response, which is absurd because you're objectively the most dangerous person I've ever met. You want to be around me intentionally, Yoshii said, not by accident. I want to see if my nervous system is right to trust you, even though my logical brain says it's a terrible idea. She met his eyes, and I want to know if this could help Lydia, because she's learning to be afraid by watching me, and I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't pass this trauma to her like some kind of inheritance. Yoshii was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I left Japan because I was tired of being a weapon. I came here to be quiet, invisible, to manage obligations from a distance without becoming what I was trained to be. But I don't know how to be close to people outside the structure of duty and violence. I don't know how to be human in the way you're asking. Then we're both wounded, Lori said. Both are trying to rewire our nervous systems from damage. Both terrified of connection. And you think we could help each other? I think we could practice being less broken together. Slowly. With boundaries. For Lydia's sake, if nothing else. For Lydia's sake, Yoshii repeated, but something in his expression suggested he understood it was more than that. They stood in the morning light, two people carrying impossible weights, and made an agreement that had no name and no guarantee, only the shared understanding that sometimes healing requires exactly the kind of risk that terrifies you most. The arrangement started small, almost invisible. Wednesday evenings became origami lessons. Yoshii would arrive at 6:30, always announcing himself with a knock, always removing his shoes at the door, always settling at their kitchen table with the same careful precision he brought to everything. Lydia would bounce in from her room, chattering about her day, while Lori made tea and pretended her heart wasn't racing with the newness of allowing someone into their space. But the racing always settled, usually within 10 minutes, sometimes less. Dr. Morgan called it titrated exposure, small doses of the thing that should scare you, in controlled circumstances, until your nervous system learns a new response. Lori called it Wednesday therapy with folded paper. Yoshii taught Lydia how to make cranes, frogs, and flowers that bloomed when you pulled the stem. His hands, those tattooed instruments of controlled violence, moved with absolute gentleness, demonstrating each fold multiple times, never rushing, never impatient when Lydia crumpled her 10th attempt in frustration. The paper does not judge your mistakes, he told her once. It only waits for you to try again. Lori watched from the kitchen counter, supposedly preparing dinner, but really studying the way her daughter's shoulders had started to relax over the weeks, the way Lydia's laughter had returned like spring after a harsh winter. And she noticed something else. Her own hands had stopped shaking. Not completely, not permanently, but in those Wednesday evening hours, while Yoshii's calm presence filled their small apartment, Lori's dysregulated nervous system found something it hadn't experienced in months. Rest. How was the practice going? Dr. Morgan asked during their weekly session. It's strange, Lori admitted. Some days I'm convinced I'm making a terrible mistake, that I'm exposing Lydia to danger, that I'm rationalizing a connection to someone I shouldn't trust. But then, she paused, searching for words. Then he'll do something small. He'll notice Lydia is tired and suggest we stop early. He'll text before coming over, always respecting boundaries. He'll maintain the exact distance I need without me having to ask. And my body just settles. Your nervous system is learning a new pattern, Dr. Morgan said. For months, it's been trained to expect danger everywhere. Now, it's experiencing consistent safety with predictable behavior. That's neuroplasticity in action, your brain physically rewiring itself based on new experiences. But the danger is real, Lori insisted. Those men who visited him weren't social calls. His past isn't past, it's ongoing management. I'm not making this up. No, you're not. The danger exists, but so does his restraint. Both things can be true simultaneously. Someone can have the capacity for violence and choose not to exercise it. That choice, made consistently over time, is what your nervous system is responding to. Lori thought about that later, during another Wednesday evening, watching Yoshii teach Lydia the ancient art of tsuru folding while explaining the legend of 1,000 cranes granting a wish. "What would you wish for?" Lydia asked him. Yoshii was quiet for a moment, his tattooed fingers pausing mid-fold. "To be worthy of kindness I don't deserve." It was the most unguarded thing Lori had ever heard him say. The shift happened gradually, then suddenly. Thanksgiving week brought Lydia's school play, a production of The Wizard of Oz, where she'd been cast as a munchkin. Small role, big excitement. Lori had taken the evening off work, determined to be the present mother she'd struggled to be since the shooting. But the auditorium, crowded, loud, echoing with chaotic noise, triggered her first panic attack in weeks. The walls started closing in. Her vision tunneled. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. She made it to the hallway before the hyperventilation started. That's where Yoshii found her, sitting on the floor, counting backward from 100, trying to breathe through the familiar terror while hating herself for missing Lydia's performance. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her space, just sat down against the opposite wall, far enough away to not trigger her proximity alarms, but close enough that she could see him. "May I tell you something about fear?" he asked quietly. Lori managed a nod between gasping breaths. "When I was young, very young, my father taught me that fear is information. It tells you what you value, what you should protect, what you cannot afford to lose." He paused. "You are not weak for feeling this. You are human for wanting to protect your daughter from every possible harm, including the harm of having a mother who sometimes cannot breathe." "I'm ruining her childhood," Lori gasped. "No, you're teaching her that adults sometimes struggle, and struggle does not mean failure. You're teaching her that fear is survivable, that panic passes, that love persists even when the body betrays us with chemical floods and misfiring neurons." Something in his calm certainty started to regulate her breathing, not because he was fixing her, but because he was present with her fear without flinching from it. "How do you know this?" she asked when she could speak normally. "Because I spent decades learning to control fear by pretending it didn't exist. And what I discovered was that unfelt fear becomes violence. Unacknowledged pain becomes cruelty. You're doing the harder thing, feeling everything, surviving it anyway." Lori looked at him, really looked, and saw what she'd been too defensive to see before. Yoshii wasn't calm because he didn't feel. He was calm because he'd learned to carry enormous feelings without letting them consume him. "Were you afraid when you left Japan?" she asked. "Terrified. Every day for the first year, I expected someone to find me, to remind me that men like me don't get to choose quieter lives. But no one came, and eventually I realized the fear was a habit, not a prediction. My nervous system had been trained for threat. It took years to teach them that absence of threat was real, not temporary." "Years," Lori repeated, the timeline settling over her like both weight and relief. "Healing is not linear. It is not quick, but it is possible." He met her eyes across the hallway. "I am proof of that. And if I can be, so can you." They sat in silence while the muffled sounds of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" drifted through the auditorium doors. When Lori's breathing had fully normalized, when the panic had receded like a tide, Yoshii stood and offered his hand. "I believe we have a munchkin to applaud," he said. Lori took his hand. Tattooed fingers, controlled strength, unexpected gentleness, and let him help her up. They watched the rest of the play, standing at the back of the auditorium. Yoshii didn't ask if she was okay, didn't offer unsolicited advice, just stood beside her, his regulated nervous system a kind of anchor, while Lori's daughter sang about rainbows and impossible wishes. Afterward, when Lydia ran up beaming in her munchkin costume, she looked between them and asked, "Did you see me?" "Every moment," Yoshii said with absolute sincerity. And Lori realized he wasn't just talking about the play. 6 months into their unusual arrangement, Dr. Morgan reviewed Lori's progress metrics with barely contained professional satisfaction. "Your resting heart rate has dropped from 95 to 78 beats per minute. You're sleeping through the night more often than not. The frequency of panic attacks has decreased by 70%. You've returned to full duties at work without accommodation." Dr. Morgan looked up from her notes. "This isn't just therapy, Lori. This is fundamental nervous system regulation." "It's the Wednesday evenings," Lori said, "and the Saturday mornings." The Saturday mornings had evolved organically. Yoshii had started appearing at their apartment complex around 9 a.m., settling on the curb near the playground with a thermos of green tea, not saying much but reliably present while Lydia played. Lori would join him, initially because she felt obligated, later because those quiet hours had become essential to her week. They didn't talk much. That was part of the gift. Yoshii didn't try to fix her or explain her to herself. He just existed beside her, his controlled presence like ballast for her anxious mind, while Lydia made friends with neighborhood children and relearned the art of fearless play. "He texted me yesterday," Lori told Dr. Morgan. "Said he had to return to Japan for 2 weeks. Business obligations he couldn't defer." And I felt. She paused, examining the feeling. Not panic, not abandonment, just disappointment. Like I was going to miss something valuable. "That's attachment," Dr. Morgan said gently. "Healthy attachment based on consistent positive experience rather than need or fear." "Is it, though? Healthy?" "He's still connected to Yakuza. He still has obligations that could become dangerous. I'm choosing to trust someone past, who's present, involves organized crime." "Let me ask you something," Dr. Morgan said. "Has he ever lied to you about what he is?" "No. He's been brutally honest." "Has he ever made promises he couldn't keep?" "No. He's careful not to promise anything he can't deliver." "Has he ever violated the boundaries you've set?" Lori thought about all the times Yoshii had maintained a respectful distance, had asked before changing plans, and had respected her need for control and predictability. "Never." "Then what you're describing isn't naivety, Lori. It's an informed choice. You're not pretending the danger doesn't exist. You're acknowledging that danger and choosing to trust someone's demonstrated pattern of restraint anyway. That's actually the opposite of trauma response. It's agency." The word settled into Lori like truth. Agency. Choice. Not the illusion of control she'd been clinging to through isolation, but the genuine power of choosing connection despite risk. When Yoshii returned from Japan 2 weeks later, he looked different. Older, maybe. More tired. The weight of whatever business he'd managed was visible in the set of his shoulders. Lori met him at the warehouse on a Sunday morning, bringing coffee like she'd started doing on weekends. "How was it?" she asked. "Necessary. Complicated. Final." He took the coffee with a small nod of gratitude. "I have fulfilled the last obligation that required my physical presence. Going forward, I can manage everything remotely. No more visits from suited men. No more reminders of what I was. Is that possible? To really leave that life? I don't know, he admitted. I am attempting something few have managed, but I am attempting it nevertheless. Because, he paused, choosing words carefully, because I have discovered something here worth protecting. He didn't specify what. He didn't need to. They stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee while Phoenix woke up around them, and Lori felt something she hadn't felt in years, the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. Spring came to Phoenix with its usual dramatic transition, brutal heat giving way to perfect temperatures that reminded people why they endured summer in the desert. Lydia's 9th birthday fell on a Saturday in April. They celebrated at the apartment with origami decorations Yoshii had taught her to make, and watching her daughter laugh freely. No shadows, no learned caution, just pure 9-year-old joy. Lori felt something break open in her chest. Not breaking like damage, breaking like spring. Later, after Lydia had gone to bed surrounded by paper cranes and new books, Lori found Yoshii cleaning up plates from the party. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, but I want to be useful. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Lori asked the question that had been forming for months. Why did you stay? When you saw how damaged I was, how much work it would take, why didn't you just keep your distance? Yoshii was quiet for a long moment, considering. Because I recognized myself in you. Someone is trying to survive by controlling everything, not realizing that complete control is another form of prison. And I thought, perhaps if I could witness your fear without trying to fix it, it would teach me how to witness my own. Has it? I am learning, he said carefully, to sit with discomfort, to allow connection without the structure of obligation, to be someone other than what I was trained to be. It is slow, but I believe it is working. Lori moved closer, not touching, but near enough that their nervous systems could communicate in a language below words. My therapist says trauma recovery isn't about eliminating fear. It's about learning that you can feel afraid and still function. That fear doesn't have to run your life. Your therapist is wise. She also says that healing often looks like love. But it's not the falling kind. It's the staying kind. Yoshii turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw the same careful hope she felt. I'm not good at the traditional expressions of affection, he said. I do not know how to be romantic or spontaneous or any of the things people expect. All I know is how to be present, reliable, patient, to witness without fixing, to regulate when everything feels chaotic. That's exactly what I need, Lori said softly. Not someone to save me. Someone to sit with me while I save myself. And your daughter? She deserves more than a man with a complicated past and tattooed fingers. My daughter deserves what every child deserves. Adults who are doing the hard work of healing, who shows up consistently, who taught her that fear is survivable and change is possible. Lori took a breath. You've taught her more about emotional regulation than any conventional father figure could. You've shown her what controlled strength looks like. What does restrained power means? Those aren't small gifts. Yoshii reached out slowly, always telegraphing his movements, always giving her time to refuse, and took her hand. His tattooed fingers, instruments of controlled violence that had become instruments of gentle precision, intertwined with hers. I cannot promise never to be dangerous, he said. My past ensures that some capacity for violence will always exist. But I can promise to choose restraint, to choose presence, to choose you and Lydia over every other obligation, even the ones written in ink and blood. That's all I'm asking, Lori said. Not perfection, just honest practice. They stood in the kitchen of her small apartment, two wounded people who'd found healing not in the absence of damage, but in the presence of someone patient enough to witness the repair work. and Lori felt her nervous system settle into a pattern it had been learning for months. This was safety, not the absence of danger, but the presence of consistent care. Not the elimination of fear, but the company of someone who stayed through it anyway. Outside, Phoenix settled into a perfect spring evening temperature. Inside, something equally impossible was growing. The quiet revolution of two traumatized nervous systems teaching each other that safety was learnable, that trust was earnable, that love was sometimes the slow accumulation of Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings and shared silences that spoke louder than promises. Lydia would wake up tomorrow to paper cranes hanging from her ceiling and a mother whose hands no longer trembled. She'd wave to Yoshii from the window, and he'd nod back with the same controlled gesture he always used: reliable, predictable, and safe. And maybe that was what healing looked like in real life. Not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual rewiring. Not the erasure of trauma, but the patient's construction of safety through consistent, boring, beautiful repetition. Dr. Morgan had been right about something else, too. Sometimes the opposite of trauma wasn't the absence of fear. It was the presence of someone who stayed anyway. If this story touched you, share where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories that stay with you.